Marcus married my daughter for her inheritance, but when that wasn't enough, he decided to cut out the middleman and rob me directly. Breaking into a retired detective's house at midnight was bold. It was also the stupidest thing he'd ever done. My name is Frank Castellano, 67 years old, retired after 30 years with the Pittsburgh Police Department. I spent 2 decades working homicide, robbery, and fraud cases before finishing my career training younger detectives. In 3 decades of police work, you learn to read people, to spot trouble coming from miles away. I should have trusted those instincts when Marcus Rivera first showed up at my door 2 years ago, asking permission to marry my daughter Sarah. Sarah was 28 then, working as a nurse at UPMC Presbyterian, living in a nice apartment in Shadyside that she paid for herself. She was smart, independent, and had never brought home a man who wasn't worth meeting. Marcus was different. Something about his smile didn't reach his eyes, and his answers to my questions felt rehearsed. When I asked about his job, he said he was between opportunities. When I asked about his family, he gave vague answers about growing up all over the place. But Sarah was in love, and she was an adult. I gave my blessing and hoped I was wrong about the red flags I was seeing. I wasn't wrong. The wedding was small but expensive. Marcus insisted on an upscale venue, premium bar, designer flowers, all paid for by Sarah's savings and a generous contribution from me. When I suggested a more modest celebration, Marcus laughed it off. "Frank, you only get married once," he said, putting his arm around Sarah. "We want to start our marriage right." Start their marriage right, with other people's money. The first red flag came during the honeymoon planning. Marcus wanted to go to Italy for 3 weeks, staying in 5-star hotels. When Sarah mentioned they couldn't afford it, Marcus suggested she ask me for help. "Your dad's loaded," I overheard him telling Sarah. "He's got that pension, the house is paid off, plus all that money from your mom's life insurance. He won't miss it." My wife Maria had died 4 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. The life insurance money wasn't for vacations. It was for my retirement, for health care costs, for leaving something to Sarah when I was gone. But Sarah asked, eyes bright with excitement about the honeymoon, and I couldn't say no. I gave them $8,000 for Italy. When they returned, Marcus was full of stories about the expensive restaurants they'd visited, the designer clothes they'd bought, the tours they'd taken. He showed me photos of himself wearing a $300 watch he'd bought in Rome. "Thanks for making this possible, Frank," he said, shaking my hand. "Sarah deserves the best." Sarah deserved better than a husband who saw her father as a personal ATM. Over the next year, the requests became more frequent. Car repairs that cost twice what they should have, medical bills that insurance supposedly wouldn't cover, emergency expenses that always seemed to coincide with something Marcus wanted to buy. Each time, Marcus would send Sarah to ask. Never came to me directly, always made it seem like Sarah's idea, always presented it as a temporary loan that would be paid back as soon as things settled down. None of the loans were ever repaid. I started keeping track. In 18 months of marriage, I'd given them $23,000 in loans and gifts. Car repair, $3,500. Medical bills, $4,200. Security deposit for a new apartment, $2,800. Emergency dental work, $1,900. Christmas gifts for Marcus's family, $800. Furniture for the new apartment, $2,200. The list went on. Meanwhile, Marcus had quit his job, something about creative differences with his boss, and was supposedly starting his own consulting business. The business never seemed to generate any income, but it did require expensive equipment, a professional wardrobe, and networking events that always cost money. Sarah was working overtime to cover their basic expenses, while Marcus pursued his entrepreneurial dreams with my money. The breaking point came last Christmas when Sarah asked if I could help them with their rent. "Just this once, Dad," she said, looking exhausted. "Marcus's business is about to take off, but we're a little short this month." I gave her the money, but that night I drove past their apartment building. Marcus's car wasn't there, but I could see lights on in their unit. I waited for 2 hours until Marcus returned, carrying shopping bags from Best Buy and wearing a new leather jacket. That's when I realized the truth. Marcus wasn't struggling to make ends meet. He was living off my money, while Sarah worked herself to death supporting both of them. 30 years as a detective teaches you how to investigate without being obvious. I started by checking public records, social media, and doing the kind of background research I should have done before Marcus married my daughter. What I found made my blood run cold. Marcus Rivera had been married twice before. His first wife, Jennifer, had divorced him after 2 years, citing financial abuse and theft of marital assets. His second wife, Patricia, had filed for bankruptcy 6 months after their divorce, claiming Marcus had run up massive debts in her name. Both women had restraining orders against him. I dug deeper. Marcus had a history of targeting women with financial stability, nurses, teachers, social workers, women with steady incomes and family support. He'd marry them, drain their resources, then move on when the money ran out. Sarah was just his latest mark, but it got worse. I found court records showing that Marcus had been arrested for burglary in Ohio 5 years ago. The charges were dropped when he agreed to pay restitution, but the pattern was clear. When the easy money dried up, Marcus was willing to take what he wanted by force. I called Detective Ray Murphy, my former partner who still worked robbery. Ray, I need a favor. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to protect themselves from a potential break-in without appearing to set a trap, what would you recommend? Ray chuckled. Hypothetically, Frank, I'd say security cameras are legal. Safes with GPS tracking are available, and marked bills are standard practice in investigations. Hypothetically, of course. Of course. But Frank, if this is about family, maybe you should talk to them directly. I thought about that. I thought about sitting Sarah down and showing her Marcus's criminal history, his previous marriages, his pattern of financial abuse. But I knew Sarah. She was loyal to a fault, and she was in love. She'd defend Marcus, make excuses for his past, and probably cut me out of her life for investigating her husband. No, I needed proof that would be undeniable. I needed to catch Marcus in the act. I started making changes to my routine, changes that would be noticed by someone watching the house. I installed a new security system, but I made sure to complain loudly to my neighbors about how complicated it was, how I kept forgetting to set it. I opened a safe in my home office, making sure to position it where it would be visible from the window. I started talking to Sarah about keeping cash in the house because I didn't trust banks anymore. Most importantly, I started documenting everything Marcus did that suggested he was casing my house. He'd started showing up unannounced, always with some excuse, returning a tool he'd borrowed, dropping off leftovers from Sarah, checking on me because Sarah was worried I seemed lonely. Each time he'd wander through the house, asking questions about my security system, commenting on valuable items, mentioning how I probably had a lot of cash lying around since I was from a generation that didn't trust banks. During one visit, I caught him taking photos of my home office with his phone. "Just showing Sarah how nice your setup is," he explained when I asked about it. "She's thinking about redecorating our place." Sarah had never mentioned redecorating. She barely had time to clean their apartment between her nursing shifts and Marcus's financial emergencies. The final piece of evidence came when my neighbor, Mrs. O'Brien, called to tell me she'd seen Marcus driving slowly past my house several times when she knew I wasn't home. "He'd sit there for 10 or 15 minutes, she said, like he was waiting for something. I thought you should know." Marcus was planning something. I just needed to give him the opportunity. I made it known through Sarah that I was going to visit my sister in Philadelphia for the weekend. I packed a bag, made a show of leaving on Friday afternoon, and drove to a hotel 20 minutes away instead of Philadelphia. Friday night, I parked down the street and watched my house. Nothing happened. Saturday night, same thing. Marcus was being cautious. Sunday night, I saw his car cruise past my house twice before parking 3 blocks away. He walked back, dressed in dark clothes, carrying what looked like a crowbar. I watched from my hotel room through the security camera app on my phone as Marcus spent 20 minutes circling my house, checking windows and doors. He was professional about it. Someone had taught him how to case a target. At 11:47 p.m., he jimmied the lock on my back door and entered my house. I waited 15 minutes before calling 911, then drove back to my house. I wanted to give Marcus enough time to commit to the burglary, but not enough time to get away with anything valuable. When I arrived, 2 patrol cars were already on scene. Through my window, I could see Marcus in my office, the safe door open, cash scattered on my desk. The officers were waiting for him when he tried to leave through the back door. Marcus was arrested on charges of breaking and entering, burglary and theft. The cash he'd taken from my safe was marked, serial numbers I'd recorded and photographed beforehand. But the real evidence was what else he'd taken. My late wife's jewelry, my service weapon from my police days, and documents from my safe that included bank statements and investment account information. This wasn't a simple burglary. Marcus had been planning to clean me out completely. Detective Murphy handled the case personally. "Frank, this guy came prepared," he told me the next morning. He had a list of everything he wanted to take, including account numbers and passwords. "How did he get access to your financial information?" I thought about all the times Marcus had been in my house, all the conversations where I'd mentioned banks or investments, all the opportunities he'd had to go through my mail or personal papers. He's been planning this for months, I realized. Gets worse. We found similar lists for 2 other elderly men in the neighborhood. Your son-in-law was planning to rob half the street. The scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise was larger than I'd imagined. He wasn't just targeting me, he was running a systematic operation against elderly residents in my neighborhood. When Sarah arrived at the police station, she was hysterical. "Dad, what happened? They're saying Marcus broke into your house. But that's impossible. He was home with me all night." I showed her the security footage on my phone. There was Marcus, clear as day, jimmying my back door and walking through my house with a crowbar. Sarah stared at the screen in shock. "This can't be real. Marcus wouldn't do this." "Sarah, there's more you need to know." I showed her everything I'd discovered. Marcus's criminal history, his previous marriages, his pattern of financial abuse, the evidence that he'd been systematically stealing from me for 2 years. "He married you for your money," I said gently. "When that wasn't enough, he decided to rob me." Sarah broke down completely, not just because of the betrayal, but because she finally understood how blind she'd been to what Marcus really was. The investigation into Marcus revealed the full extent of his criminal operation. He'd been part of a network that targeted elderly residents throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. His method was always the same: identify vulnerable elderly targets through research, marry or befriend someone with access to the target, gather intelligence about their assets and routines, then rob them when the opportunity arose. In my case, marrying Sarah gave him perfect access to information about my finances, my habits, and my security measures. Detective Murphy showed me files on 6 other cases where Marcus and his associates had robbed elderly victims after months of preparation. Most of these victims never even realized they were being set up, Murphy explained. The thieves would spend months gathering information, then strike when the victim was away or vulnerable. The total stolen from all victims was over $340,000 in cash, jewelry, and valuables. But the emotional damage was worse than the financial losses. 3 of the elderly victims had been so traumatized by the violation of their homes that they'd moved to assisted living facilities. One had suffered a heart attack from the stress. Marcus had been destroying lives for profit, and my daughter had been his unwitting accomplice. The worst part was realizing how close he'd come to succeeding with me. If I hadn't been a retired detective, if I hadn't trusted my instincts about his behavior, I could have been another victim. Marcus's trial was a media sensation. The local news covered it extensively. Son-in-law robs retired detective father-in-law. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. During the trial, prosecutors revealed the full scope of Marcus's criminal network. He'd been the inside man for a larger organization that specialized in elder fraud and theft. His job was to get close to elderly targets with significant assets, gather intelligence about their security measures and routines, then provide that information to professional thieves who would rob the victims. In most cases, Marcus would maintain his relationship with the target's family, providing him with an alibi and deflecting suspicion. But in my case, Marcus had gotten greedy. Instead of waiting for his associates to rob me, he decided to do it himself and keep all the profits. That decision cost him everything. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, security footage, marked bills, my documentation of his suspicious behavior, testimony from his previous victims, and records of his communications with other members of the criminal network. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that this was a family dispute that had gotten out of hand, that Marcus was struggling financially and had made a desperate mistake. But the evidence of premeditation was clear. The lists of targets, the months of planning, the systematic approach to gathering intelligence, this wasn't desperation, it was professional criminal enterprise. Marcus was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His associates received similar sentences. Sarah filed for divorce while Marcus was awaiting trial. She moved back in with me temporarily while she rebuilt her life and her finances. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said one evening as we sat on the porch. "I should have listened to you about Marcus. I should have seen the signs." "He was a professional con artist," I told her. "His job was to be convincing. You weren't naive. You were targeted by an expert." But Sarah still blamed herself for bringing Marcus into our lives, for giving him access to me, for not recognizing what he was doing. The hardest part for her was realizing that nothing about their relationship had been real. Marcus had researched her before they met, had chosen her specifically because she was a nurse with a stable income and a wealthy father. Their entire courtship, marriage, and 2 years together had been an elaborate con designed to separate me from my money. "Did he ever love me?" Sarah asked one night. I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe Marcus had developed genuine feelings for Sarah, or maybe he was just that good at his job. It didn't really matter. The relationship had been built on lies from the beginning. Sarah started therapy to work through the trauma and betrayal. She also joined a support group for family members of con artists, where she learned that what happened to us was more common than most people realize. "There are people who make a living targeting families like ours," she told me after one of her group meetings. "They study us, learn our weaknesses, then exploit our love and trust to rob us." 1 year later, Sarah had rebuilt her life. She'd gotten a promotion at the hospital, moved into a new apartment, and started dating again, though much more carefully this time. The money Marcus had stolen was never fully recovered, but insurance covered most of my losses. More importantly, my relationship with Sarah was stronger than ever. "You saved me, Dad," she said on the anniversary of Marcus's arrest. "If you hadn't caught him when you did, he would have destroyed both of us financially." But I hadn't just saved our money. I'd saved Sarah from years more of abuse and manipulation. Marcus's previous wives had told investigators that the financial abuse got worse over time, that Marcus became more controlling and dangerous as his schemes became more elaborate. Detective Murphy called me occasionally with updates on similar cases. "Frank, your case helped us identify a whole network of these scammers," he told me. "We've prevented at least 12 other robberies by using the intelligence we got from Marcus's phone and computer." Sometimes the best thing you can do for family is trust your instincts, even when it's painful. Sometimes protecting the people you love means being suspicious of the people they trust. My name is Frank Castellano, and I'm the retired detective who caught my son-in-law robbing me at midnight. Not through luck or accident, but through 30 years of training that taught me to recognize predators in sheep's clothing. Marcus thought he was targeting a helpless old man. Instead, he walked into a trap set by someone who'd spent 3 decades putting criminals behind bars. The last thing I heard about Marcus was that he was having a difficult time in prison. Apparently, criminals don't like other criminals who prey on elderly people and betray family trust. Sometimes justice comes from the courtroom. Sometimes it comes from fellow inmates who have their own code of ethics. Either way, justice came for Marcus Rivera, and my daughter Sarah finally learned to trust her father's judgment about the men in her life. Frank's story demonstrates how professional criminals systematically target families through manipulation and long-term planning. By trusting his detective instincts and gathering evidence methodically, Frank not only protected himself but helped break up a larger criminal network. Sometimes experience and vigilance are the best defenses against those who would exploit family trust for criminal gain.